The Coin Flip, a true story submitted by one of our viewers. We all hit a point where the world just grinds you down, where the weight of your own life becomes too much to bear. You crave an escape, a vanishing act, a brief moment where the world can't find you. And you don't have to find it. Sometimes that escape takes you to the most unexpected places. And sometimes those places have been waiting for you. This story comes from Brad, back in 1989. He was 19, living in the extreme northeast of Indiana, working the midnight shift at a factory, the kind of job that bleeds into your sleep and leaves you feeling perpetually out of sync with the world. And to top it off, he just navigated the messy wreckage of his first real breakup. Life was a relentless cycle of production lines, fluorescent lights, and aching loneliness. He needed to get out, desperately. Brad called it his coin flip trip. No destination, no plan, just a full tank of gas and an old muscle car. A growling beast from the late 60s, ready to eat up the miles. He finished his shift at 7 a.m. on a Friday. The early morning sun already feeling too harsh after a night under artificial light. Instead of going home, he just pointed the car west, towards Chicago, and drove. The open road offered a kind of instant therapy. The roar of the engine, the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before him, the anonymous blur of towns rushing by. It was just him and the highway, just mile after mile of pure, unadulterated freedom. He kept going. The stress of the factory, the sting of the breakup, slowly dissipating into the rearview mirror. He drove through Chicago, a concrete labyrinth he barely noticed, his mind fixed on the open road. Then he headed north, following the curving western coastline of Lake Michigan. The landscape began to change, becoming softer, greener, dotted with small, unassuming towns. Hours melted away. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. By 5 p.m., exhaustion was starting to set in, the kind of bone-deep weariness that makes your eyelids heavy and your focus blur. He pulled into a small town called Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Just another anonymous stop on an anonymous trip. He spotted a Motel 6, its familiar red sign a beacon of temporary relief. The check-in was routine. A sleepy clerk, a plastic key card, room 107. He dragged his bag inside, barely glancing around. It was a standard motel room. 2 beds, a small table, a TV that probably got 4 channels. And just inside the door, a clothes rack with stainless steel hangers, permanently mounted to a steel rod. A detail so mundane, so forgettable, it would soon become seared into his memory. Brad just wanted sleep. He threw his bag down, kicked off his shoes, and collapsed onto the bed, the hum of the road still echoing in his ears as he drifted off into a deep, much-needed slumber. He had no idea the rest he was about to get wouldn't be peaceful. Sleep, when it finally came, was heavy and dreamless. The kind of deep, exhaustion-induced slumber that pulls you under completely. A merciful blackout from the worries of the waking world. Brad was out cold, lost in the quiet oblivion of a cheap motel room in a town he'd never heard of. For a few hours, he found the peace he'd been craving. But peace, like silence, can be a fragile thing. And some silences are just waiting to be broken. He shot awake. Not slowly, not groggily, just awake. His eyes snapped open, heart instantly hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The sound had been undeniable, loud, forceful, right there in the room with him. The hangers, the ones on the rack just inside the door. It sounded as if someone grabbed them and shoved them to one end of the rod. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to sit up, to turn on the light, but a more primal part of his brain, the one that freezes in the face of absolute terror, held him, rigid. He lay there, utterly still, eyes wide open, staring into the dim motel room. The only light was the faint glow filtering in from the streetlights outside, casting long, blurry shadows. And then he saw it. Floating, roughly 6 feet off the floor, near the wall where the clothes rack was, red mist. Not smoke, not fog. This was luminous, almost like a cloud of glowing embers, but without heat. It was roughly the size of a watermelon, shimmering faintly in the dim light, and within its core, a denser, darker concentration of the same red mist, perhaps the size of a tennis ball, pulsed with a soft, internal glow. It wasn't drifting aimlessly. It was moving deliberately. It floated along the wall, directly towards the end, as if drawn by an unseen force. Brad's eyes were locked on it, every fiber of his being screaming for an explanation, for this to be a dream, an optical illusion from his exhausted mind. But the sheer clarity, the undeniable presence of it, left no room for doubt. The red mist reached the end of the wall. For a few agonizing seconds, it seemed to pause, hovering there, its dense core pulsing with that soft inner light. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement that defied physics, it dropped down about a foot, settling just above an old, worn armchair in the corner of the room. It seemed to linger there, observing, waiting. Brad couldn't breathe, couldn't move. His mind was a frantic kaleidoscope of disbelief and stark terror. He'd never believed in ghosts, in spirits, in any of it. He was a factory worker, grounded in the tangible. But this was undeniably real, undeniably there. And it was doing things that defied logic, defied explanation. It was a violation of everything he knew. After what felt like an eternity, the mist moved again. It slowly, almost majestically, floated up the wall near the ceiling. Its glow seemed to brighten for a split second, the red intensifying, before it simply vanished. It didn't dissipate. It didn't fade. It just merged with the wall, as if stepping through an invisible membrane, leaving absolutely nothing behind. The red mist was gone, vanished, as if it had never been there at all. The air in the room, however, still felt thick, electric. Brad lay frozen for another moment, his heart threatening to punch through his ribs. The image of that pulsating red cloud burned into the back of his eyes. Was he awake? Was this some elaborate, waking nightmare fueled by exhaustion and grief? He squeezed his eyes shut, then snapped them open again, desperate for the mundane reality of a cheap motel room. Then, from the room just beyond that very wall, the one where the mist had disappeared, came a sound that ripped through the oppressive silence. A woman screamed, a single, raw, guttural cry of pure terror. It wasn't a scream of pain or anger or frustration. It was a sound of primal, absolute horror, as if she'd just witnessed something utterly unthinkable. The sound detonated in the quiet room, confirming every terrifying, impossible thing Brad had just seen. He wasn't dreaming. He wasn't hallucinating. The people in that room, the one on the other side of the wall, they had seen it too. They had seen something. That shared terror, that undeniable external validation of the impossible, snapped him out of his paralysis. The adrenaline surged, cold and sharp. He didn't think. He didn't question. He just moved. He scrambled off the bed, grabbed his duffel bag, the one he'd tossed carelessly by the door, and slung it over his shoulder. Every second felt like an eternity. He had to get out, now. As he reached the door, his eyes darted back to the clothes rack, the stainless steel hangers. They were all pushed to one side of the rod, precisely where the loud metallic clang had come from, exactly as if someone or something had just slammed them there. It was a small detail, concrete proof in a sea of unreality, and it solidified the terror. He pulled the door open and practically stumbled into the deserted hallway. The motel corridor was bland, fluorescent lit, and utterly mundane, a stark contrast to the horror he was fleeing. Just as he stepped out, the door to the room next to his, room 108, opened simultaneously. A man emerged, looking utterly disheveled, his eyes wide and bewildered, his hair a mess. Behind him, Brad could hear his wife, her voice hushed but frantic, still talking inside the room. The man's gaze met Brad's, wide and searching, a mirror of the same shock and confusion. He started to open his mouth, perhaps to ask what Brad had seen, or to confirm his own horrifying experience. But Brad didn't stop. He didn't need confirmation. He just kept walking, moving faster, his only thought to put as much distance as possible between himself and that room. "Nope," Brad muttered, not breaking stride, his voice hoarse with adrenaline. "I'm out of here." He didn't even check out. He jumped into his muscle car, cranked the engine, and peeled out of the Motel 6 parking lot, leaving Fond du Lac, Wisconsin behind him in a cloud of dust and terror. His coin flip trip, meant to be a relaxing escape, had just become a desperate, nonstop flight. He kept driving all the way around Lake Michigan, through the rest of the night and into the morning, until he was back home in Indiana. He didn't stop, not for rest, not for food, not until he felt the safety of familiar ground beneath his tires. Brad drove. He didn't know how many hours passed, only that the sun eventually rose, painting the sky in the familiar hues of an Indiana morning. But the light offered no comfort. He tried to convince himself, repeated it like a mantra. It was just a dream. Exhaustion, the stress of the breakup, the factory, a vivid hallucination. He was 19. He'd been through a lot. It was logical. It had to be. He kept going. The image of that red mist, that pulsing core, playing on a loop behind his eyes. He tried to rationalize it away, tried to fit it in a box of explainable phenomena. But then the scream would cut through his thoughts. The woman's shriek of pure, unadulterated terror. He hadn't imagined that. That was real. And the man in the hallway, his disheveled face, his wide, haunted eyes, he hadn't imagined that either. They had both seen something. They had shared it, and that shared horror cemented the impossibility of it all. The coin flip trip, meant to be an escape, had become a chase. A relentless flight from something he couldn't name, from an experience that had ripped a hole in his understanding of reality. He finally pulled into his driveway. The familiar comfort of his own home, a desperate mirage. He slammed the car door, the sound echoing in the silent morning. He walked into his house, lock the door, and sank onto his couch, utterly spent. He spent the next few days in a daze, sleeping erratically. His mind kept replaying the scene, the hangers, the mist, the scream. He searched the local news for Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. Nothing. No reports of strange incidents at a Motel 6. No mention of a terrified couple. Just the mundane, everyday headlines of a small town. It was as if the universe had conspired to erase all proof, leaving him alone with the terrifying memory. He tried to move on, went back to work, tried to forget the red mist and the shared scream, tried to convince himself that it was just a strange, isolated incident. But some things burrow deep. Some experiences don't just fade, they linger. They echo, especially when the world around you is becoming increasingly connected. It's been years since that trip, decades. Brad still lives in Indiana. He still thinks about that night, about that room. He knows, deep down, it wasn't a dream. He'll carry that moment with him for the rest of his life. A quiet, unsettling certainty that there are things in this world, things that exist just beyond our senses, capable of manifesting in the most unexpected ways. But recently, Brad told me something else. Something that gives that old story a whole new layer of chilling dread. He got a smart speaker for his living room. The kind that's always listening, always ready to answer, always connected to everything. He told me that sometimes, late at night, when the house is silent and the street lights cast long shadows in his living room, he hears it. Stay tuned.